Hello and welcome to Life Vocabulary. Welcome back. Of course, I am Serena, and this episode is going to be a reaction to Jordan Peterson talking about how creative you are. And this lecture has done the rounds. And so I wanted to watch it myself again. And I thought I would do a reaction because I've always spoken about creativity on this channel, and I think that there's some useful reminders in this. Also, it doesn't hurt to have a little reminder about the creative process, about how we're wired and why we're wired this way. Let's see what else Jordan Peterson has to say. I hope you're well. Let's get into this.
Creativity seems related to IQ in that people with higher IQs are likely to be creative, or if you take people who are noted for their creativity, there's a high probability that they'll have a higher IQ. But there's more to it than IQ. And what creativity seems to be associated with, then again, depends on how you define creativity. Because you could define it as the sum total of creative achievements that you've made in your life, which would be the actual production of, say, artifacts of one form or another, performances or inventions or artworks or what have you. We'll go over the dimensions in a minute. Or you could also define it as the proclivity to engage in creative thought. And I think we'll start with that first. So what does it mean to think creatively? It's sort of like, it's something like this. You imagine that I toss you out an idea, and there's some probability that when I toss you that idea, that will trigger off other ideas in your imagination. So you can think about it as a threshold issue. If you're not very creative, I'll throw you an idea, and hardly any other ideas will be triggered, and the ones that will be triggered are going to be very closely associated with that initial idea. So let's say I tossed each of you an idea, and I asked you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay, so what we would see first is that the first thing that comes to mind in all likelihood would be shared by many of you. Okay, so then you can think about that as a common response, right? And so that's a less creative response. And then there'll be some things that come to mind for you that are so idiosyncratic that you're the only person that thinks it and no one can understand it. Well, that's also not exactly creative, because the thing for something to be creative, it has to be novel and useful at the same time. That's sort of a rough definition. Something creative is novel and useful. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's a certain amount of judgment that goes along with that, clearly. But if it's too novel, then no one else can understand it, and it's unlikely to be useful. So there's a range of convenience. So anyways, if you want to decide if something's creative, like what we would do, I could say to you...
I like how he describes it, a range of convenience. And so it's got to be novel as well as have some utility.
Okay, in the next 3 minutes, I want you to write down all the uses you can think of for a brick. So someone tell me a use for a brick. Breaking windows.
A furnace for your feet.
Yes, okay. What else can you use a brick for?
Build a wall.
Build a wall, it's a very small wall. A wall for ants. And what else? Paperweight. Okay, well, so you get the idea. You're not feeling very mouthy today, obviously. But so you see that, so if we gathered your responses, say I said you have to think up 20 things that you can do with a brick, then a bunch of the things that you thought would be the same, and some people would come up with something different. Like yours was reasonably different, the one about using it as a pumice stone for your feet. Someone else might have come up with that, but it's a good creative response because it's unexpected and you could actually do it. So anyway, so you'll get a graph of probability of response, right? And the more probable, the less creative, roughly speaking. It's not the only criteria though, because you also have to look at utility. So if I said, okay, you've got 3 minutes to write down as many uses as you can think of for a brick, I would score that in a variety of ways. The first thing I would do is just figure out how many uses you generated. That's called fluency. And we could also do that. I could just say, write down as many words as you can that begin with the letter S in 3 minutes, or that begin with the letter C, or 4-letter words that begin with the letter D. I can constrain it. And if I counted how many words you generated, if I had an IQ measure and I had a measure of how many words you generated, IQ plus the number of words that you generated would be a better predictor of your creativity than just IQ. So there's this fluency element and so that's something like the rate at which you can produce, say, verbal ideas. And one of the things we do know about the creativity dimension of openness is that it is associated with fluency. And it's also associated with originality. And originality would be how improbable your use was compared to the uses generated by other people. So you can think of, you get thrown an idea, and there's some probability that will co-activate other ideas. And if it co-activates many other ideas, that's like fluency. And if it co-activates ideas that are quite distant from the original idea, something like that, and you could track distance by comparing it to to probability that other people have generated it, then that's also another indication of creativity. So they have to be many unlikely responses that are useful. That's what creativity is, roughly speaking. And then you can fractionate it into different dimensions. So that's creative thinking. But then creative achievement would be the ability to take those original ideas and then actually to implement them in the world. And that's obviously much more different than merely being creative. And then what creativity is depends on which of those measurement routes that you take. Now, I developed a questionnaire with one of my students, Shelley Carson.
Interesting, because Jordan Peterson's one of those thinkers who likes to see the utility in things. So he's kind of broken down creativity into use, sort of novelty, use, and then achievement. And then there's a part of me that thinks, what about creativity just for creative sake? What if it doesn't have a use? And what if it doesn't actually go sort of like towards an achievement and it just is there for expression's sake?
About, geez, it's just about 30 years ago now, 20 years ago, I guess, called the Creative Achievement Questionnaire. And I'll show you that here. And I'll show you some of the things that are interesting about it. You hear very frequently people say things like everyone's creative. It's like, that's wrong, okay? It's wrong. It's just as wrong as saying that everyone's extroverted. First of all, you have to be pretty damn smart to be creative, because otherwise you're just going to get to where other people have already got, and that's not creative by definition. So being fast and being out there at the front of things really makes a difference. And then you also have to have these divergent thinking capabilities, and that's part of your trait structure. And creative people are really different than non-creative people, partly because, for example, they're highly motivated to do creative things and to experience novelty and to chase down aesthetic experiences and to attend movies and to read fiction and to go to museums and to enjoy poetry and to enjoy music that's not conventional music, for example. These aren't trivial differences. And so it's a real misstatement to make the proposition that everyone's creative. It's just simply not the case. It's a matter of wishful thinking. It's like saying that everyone's intelligent. It's like, well, if everyone's intelligent, then the term loses all of its meaning, because any term that you can apply to every member of a category has absolutely no meaning. Now, that doesn't, and the other thing you want to be thinking about here is that don't be thinking that creativity is such a good thing. It's a high risk, high return strategy.
Yep.
So if you're creative, you just try this. There's creative people in this room, man. You guys are going to have a hell of a time monetizing your creativity. It's virtually impossible. It's really, really difficult, because first of all, let's say you make an original product. You think the world will beat a pathway to your door if you build a better mousetrap. It's like, that's complete rubbish. It isn't true in the least. If you make a good creative product, you've probably solved about 5% of your problem. Because then you have marketing, which is insanely difficult, and then you have sales, and then you have customer support, and then you have to build an organization, and you have to, if it's really novel, you have to tell people what the hell the thing is. We built this future authoring program, right? And it's available for people online. How do you market that? No one knows what that is, and that's a real problem. If you write a book, well, then you have the problem that another million people have also written a book. But if you produce something that's completely new and doesn't have a category, people can't search for it online. How are they going to find it? So you just have, and then you have pricing problems, and it's really unbelievably difficult to produce something creative and then monetize it. And even worse, if you're the creative person, let's say you have a spectacular invention, you've got no money, right? You've got no customers. Those are big problems. And so maybe you go and you find a venture capitalist. We start with family and friends, because that's how it works. You raise money for your product. You raise money from your family and friends. That's assuming you have family and friends that have some money and that they're going to give it to you. And most people aren't in that situation. So it's a terrible barrier right off the bat. And then, of course, you're putting your family and friends at substantial financial risk, because the probability that your stupid idea is going to make money is virtually zero, even if it's a really brilliant idea. And so then let's say, well, you get past family and friends and you get venture capitalists involved, because that's often the next step, or an angel investor. There's steps in building a business. Family and friends, angel investor, that's some rich guy that you've happened to meet some manner, in some way, who's into this sort of thing and is willing to provide you with some money to get your product off the ground. Well, how much of your product is that person going to take? Well, most of it. And then if you get a venture, and no wonder, because you don't have any money, how are you going to bargain for control over your product? He'll just say, well, do you want the money or not? And if your answer is no, then he'll go and do something else with his money. It's not like there's no shortage of things that you can do with your money. There's a million things you can do with it. So you're not in a great bargaining position. And then if you get venture capitalists involved, they'll take another big chunk, and maybe if they're not very straight with you, they'll just throw you out, because maybe by that point in the company's development, you're nothing but a pain in the neck, because what do you know about marketing and sales and customer service and building an organization and running a business? Like, you don't have a clue, so why do they need you? So even if you're successful at generating a new idea and you put it into a business, the probability that you, as the originator of the idea, are going to make some money from it is very, very low. So don't be thinking that creativity is something you would want to curse yourself with. Now, it's not all bad, because it opens up avenues of experience for creative people that aren't available to people who aren't creative. But it definitely is a high risk, high return strategy. So the overwhelming probability is that you will fail. But a small proportion of creative people succeed spectacularly. And so it's like a lottery in some sense. You're probably going to lose. But if you don't lose, you could win big. And that keeps a lot of creative people going. But also, they don't really have much choice in it. Because if you're a creative person, you're like a fruit tree that's bearing fruit. So you don't really have, you can suppress it, but it's very bad for you. You know, the creative people I've worked with is if they're not creative, they're miserable. So they have to do it. But and you know, there's real joy and pleasure in it and psychological utility. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an intelligent, it's certainly not a conservative strategy for moving forward through life. So, and you know, whenever I talk to people who are creative, and you guys should listen to this.
I think the psychological utility is referencing, sorry, because I've sped him up, I feel like extra slow comparatively. So the psychological utility would be the sort of sense of sort of fulfillment, sort of your personal achievement, rather than it being sort of outwardly achievement. So psychologically, just you know, the benefit that you're getting from just the process of doing and creating.
Because I know what I'm talking about. If you happen to be creative, if you're a songwriter or another kind of musician or an artist or any of the other number of things that you might be, find a way to make money. And then practice your craft on the side, because you will starve to death otherwise. Now, for some of you that won't be true, but it's a tiny minority. Your best bet is to find a job that will keep body and soul together and parse off some time that you can pursue your creative thing, because then, well, as a long-term strategy, a medium to long-term strategy, it's a better one. But it's
Yeah, the biggest mistake is when people are told to risk it all and follow your so-called passion and dive straight in. It can be so damaging. Um, I have found that with creativity, so throughout my 20s and 30s and now in my 40s, with creativity, it's also a discipline, and it requires effort and turning up and tending to it. And you've got to build that up. You've got to build that muscle up as well. You can't just be creating just when you feel like it. There's times when you don't feel like it and you're doing it because you've made a commitment to it. And so it does become, yes, it is an outlet, but it's also, if it's a craft that you have, then practicing it, doing it more and more, you are improving it. So you've got to show up, you've got to sort of make the effort. And so there's the actual process, the commitment to the process, and then how the process unfolds itself is sort of unpredictable. So for you to quit everything and put so much pressure on it, when you are uncertain, like there's no certainty with it, you're going to affect the process of that unfolding quite considerably and significantly and negatively.
got incredibly difficult for people, musicians for example, it's incredibly difficult for new musicians to monetize their craft, even if they're really, really good at it. So it's well, so anyway, so don't be, so I say, well, everyone's not creative, and everybody goes, oh, that's terrible. It's like, it's not so terrible. It's not self-evident that you would curse someone with high levels of creativity. So, all right, so here's how our creative achievement questionnaire works. What we did essentially was we thought up how many domains there are in which you might be creative. And this is, remember, when you're designing a questionnaire, you want to be over-inclusive, because the statistics will take care of it, right? So you can take a big area of potential, you can take a large area and aim your questionnaire at it, and you can do statistics post hoc to see if you're covering the area. If the things that you're measuring are nicely correlated, there's something about them that's similar. If they're not correlated, then maybe you're measuring two different things and you can get rid of one of them. That's fine. So we did start with a pretty wide range. We thought, okay, well, what domains can you be creative in? Visual arts, painting and sculpture. Then we had experts sort of rank order levels of achievement within those domains. And so if you were a painter, 0 gives you, I have no training or recognized talent in this area. Okay, so you really want to keep an eye on the zeros, all right? So then I have taken lessons, people have commented on my talents, I have won a prize, my work has been critiqued in national publications.
I think I'm going to stop there, only because Jordan Peterson's going through a questionnaire and it's very specific to that lecture, and to the sort of lesson plan. So what do you think? What do you think? Is creativity a curse? If I speak, if I think about this conversation that I've had or could have with any of the artists and creatives that I know, I think most would say yes, or it can feel that way most of the time, or half the time, or for a time. And then the other parts of it, the other times, it feels like a real gift and something that you can't sort of that you can't and don't necessarily need to break down in this sort of intellectual manner. But I guess the point of this lecture also, sort of like the value in it, is that it can help you to sort of frame things in a more realistic way when you are sort of embarking on creative endeavors and trying to monetize it, make a living from it, fit it into your life, your professional and personal life. So it's important to have that sort of reality check. So that's the value of this lecture. And I think that's why I wanted to react to it. And it gives value to other creatives and artists. And so if it's done that, then I feel like job's done here on Life Vocabulary. Thank you very much for watching another video. I occasionally upload, but I still upload. So thank you so much for subbing and watching. I stream daily on my media, digital and political literacy channel, which is Serena Sayed. It's all linked. And I also have a separate YouTube channel to talk about the sort of content creator experience, if you like. But feel free to continue to watch here and everywhere else. And I'll see you in the next video.